My name is Dr. Khalya Hopkins. I am based out of the Bronx, New York. That's where I'm born and raised. I do work in New York City, but I live in Jersey now. And I am what is called a specialized student support lead for the New York City public school system. And I'm really glad to be here.
Hi, Khalya. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm very, very happy to have you here and to speak about the important work that you're doing in New York. And you're based out of New Jersey, but you do more of your work in New York.
Yeah, I
Um,
live in Jersey. That's my residence, but my work is in the boroughs.
yeah, I have enough friends who say they have a similar kind of situation where they're based out in New Jersey and then they kind of make that commute over. And yeah, and we just recently had a class where you were the professor, one of two
Yay.
full professors, and yeah, and it was about like teaching exceptional learners. We covered special education terms and vocabulary and approaches and inclusive classrooms and it was a whirlwind of 2 weeks because there was just so much to just absorb, and I was also just so happy to kind of be, kind of enveloped with the positive energy that both of you had. So, it's exciting to kind of see the way the various different intersections of the work that you do. And this concept that is very near and dear to my heart of global citizenship. And I think that a lot of interesting themes will emerge from this conversation. So, the first
I hope not
question,
to disappoint.
oh no, you're going to do great. I already know it. Manifesting that.
Yes, manifesting.
Yeah, and so the first question really is to kind of understand how you got to where you are now in terms of your career, the kind of motivations, the various different forks in the road, decisions you've had to make that ultimately led you to be an educator, to be professor, to be, many things. So, let's kind of look at some of the different milestones along that journey. So yeah, wherever you like to start, however far back you want to go in the timeline, it's all good.
Well, it's a long timeline. So let's see. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible while still giving you the meat and the potatoes. So, I was born in the Bronx, as I said, and I'm the second of six children. Um, my mom and my dad, for all of the things that they wanted for us, we had a bit of a struggling upbringing. It was just the 80s and just not having work in the ways that um, is so available and accessible to me now. And my parents both had attended college but didn't finish college. But they were really smart. They just didn't necessarily have all the opportunities, I think, that I've been allotted, at least. So we grew up in some sense in poverty, you know what I mean, needless to say. And as much as I would love to say I came from a family of educators, that's not my story. I came to education in a very roundabout way. I was at a PD. It's interesting that you just asked me this question because I was at a PD on Wednesday and they asked about what's your first job, your worst job, and your best job. That was the icebreaker. And when it got to me, I had to say my first job actually was being a mom. I was a mom at 14, right? I got pregnant at 14. So from the time of conception, I consider myself a mother. I had just finished my ninth grade freshman year of high school and I was pregnant. And so that was my first job, was taking care of another person. So with that being said, I didn't necessarily have this straight trajectory of like, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, that's not what I was thinking at all. I was a 90s kid who grew up on MTV and I love Nelly videos and I wanted to be a Nelly videos. Like, that was my initial, like, ooh, I would love to be one of those girls in the video, because at 15, 16, like, that's just what you dream of at times. But I was always good in school and I really took to that. And um, once I graduated a semester early from high school. So I had a couple of months to just kind of chill in between going into college. And when I went to college, I took my daughter with me. She was in both my high school in the daycare, and she was in college daycare with me. So I had the access to bring my child. That wasn't a barrier necessarily. And once I started doing well in school, I felt a sense of accomplishment there, and I just wanted that to continue. I was like, I feel good here. This is something that people acknowledge me for. I like learning. I enjoy it. I loved reading books to my daughter. That was fun for me. And then when I graduated, I went and just straight got my first master's degree in English literature. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with this in real life? And I think I went to a conference, shout out to the Mosaic Literary Conference that happens in the Bronx every year. I met someone there named Femi who was like, why aren't you a teacher? Are you a teacher? And I was like, I'm not actually. And she was like, well, you should be. And I actually applied to the New York City Teaching Fellows like a week before the deadline. And I ended up getting in because there was a shortage. It was like the recession. I came in 2009. So I actually had this really like that wasn't my intent, but it aligned and I needed stability from a child. So that's kind of how I became an educator. That's the short version.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that was wonderful, and I think it's just so timely about that icebreaker at a recent PD that you're just like, oh wow, now I'm being
Yeah,
asked that again, and yeah, and right off the bat, you're saying like first job, being a mother at age 14, I can only imagine how that must have put various strains on you, your family,
of
on your
course.
studies. And I actually recently had another conversation for the podcast with one of my classmates. Her name is Mariah, and yeah,
Mhm.
and she lives in Uganda, and she shared
Hi,
how
Mariah.
shout out to Mariah. Uh,
Yes.
and she shared that she was also a teenage mother, and that in Uganda, as well as in the United States, there is this stigma that is attached to that.
Sure.
And she reframed it as saying that she was not a teenage mother, she was a warrior mother.
Yes.
And I just
Oh,
love that. And so I
I
just
love that.
yeah, I wanted to bring that terminology back into this conversation because I thought you'd appreciate that. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, and so then going and kind of discovering that schooling, the college setting, academics, just learning was something that you were really passionate about, and that, through a series of events, someone pointed out, hey, you'd be a great teacher. I'm curious, I've asked this question to another friend of mine, but, what do you think that person at that festival saw in you? Like, what did they see in you that maybe led them to say, Khalya, why don't you apply to be, why aren't you a teacher already? What's wrong with you? Like, what do you think she saw?
So I don't know. You've taken a class with me now, so you kind of know the energy that I bring into a space. And I think that when it's not just being a participant and like raising your hand and answering people's questions, but I really do feel like if I'm talking to someone, it's very synergistic. No, 9 times out of 10, I feel like we're just kind of vibing off of each other. So she was asking questions and people were, engaging and answering, but I think there was just a way that I was not only answering but furthering the discussion and asking more questions, in addition to the questions that were being asked to me, and just really like immersing myself in being present in that moment. And I think she just saw me as like someone who had presence, which is very difficult to teach. Like I coach teachers all the time, and I'm always just like, ugh, I don't know, I don't know how to teach presence. You know what I mean? It's a harder sell. I mean, I can teach you a skill, I can teach you a strategy, but I can't necessarily teach you how to show up. That's something you have to know in your own being. And I think that our beings kind of connected. And she was just like, this energy, like, why don't you have this energy in front of children on a regular basis? And I was just like, that's a good question. I need to think about that. Like, is that something that I could bring? Because I think as a child, I went to shout out to District 9 public schools, but District 9 was yikes. That wasn't a district that was a highly sought after place to send your children. We have a very high poverty rate. We definitely didn't have a lot of resources. I was like scoring in the top 96 percentile of my class, but that was of like in the city, but it was really like we had no resources. It was like if you were the person to make it in that concrete jungle, it was like because you were just like gifted, and that's how everybody kind of treated you. And just knowing that the type of experiences I had as a student, it was not glamorous to be a teacher. We saw our teachers stressed out. We saw our teachers very tired. They were extremely like just burned out from behaviors, from just grading, all the things. And so that wasn't something we aspired that people that I went to school with aspired to do. And so that's why I mean like it was kind of very roundabout because it didn't look like a job. It looked like a job, like with the long J, long O, long B, right? Like it was too, I don't know if the juice was always worth the squeeze. You know what I mean? It didn't seem like it. And I loved my teachers growing up, but I just felt like this is a lot for one person to give of themselves every single day to a lot of different people. You got a full class. So I think she saw just me having gifts and talents, which I appreciate her recommending that to me. I'm still friends with her on Facebook. And I see her, and Femi, she saw that in me and really planted a seed that maybe my talents could be used with a wider audience. So
Yeah,
shout out to
thank you for
her.
sharing that answer. Because I feel that when it comes to friends or just even an acquaintance, right, someone from outside just kind of observing, noticing these things about ourselves, it really helps us to understand what path is emerging before us. It can be very difficult, especially as a someone who's just starting off, to validate certain strengths, skill sets that they might have, um, attitudes, etc. And and yeah, and it's really reassuring to know that, like, oh, this is something that I could potentially use. Um, I possess something that is actually quite difficult, right? Like that I know how to show up. I know how to bring my A game. I know what it's like to really give my 100% presence in front of a person, in front of a classroom, in front of whatever audience that is. Um, and and yeah, and another thing that you mentioned that really resonated with me is about the perception of teachers, right? Especially the perception that current
Oh,
students have of a lot of teachers. They see the workload, they see the stress, the sense of like never ending work because of the
right.
job and all of that. And yeah, I also was like feeling that when I was a student. It wasn't something like I never thought I would be a teacher myself. And and then, here we are. We're both
Yeah.
teachers. How did that
Right.
happen? And yeah, I think that, that teaching doesn't get the kind of credit it truly deserves. Um,
Absolutely.
and so it is worth the squeeze, but also I think there is something to say about one's intentions and like how effective one is in that process of engaging with others and being present with others. So, the next question I think relates to what you brought up, what your friend brought up about you, about what does it mean to show up? What does it mean to be present? Can you teach that? I don't know if it's the word teach, but I know that you can see it modeled by others. And I wanted to ask, like, when you were growing up, was there a particular person or set of people that modeled that for you, that modeled what it means to show up and be present and have that kind of energy?
So there were bits and pieces that I'm sure I've taken from, those models as a student. One of the women, and this is a tribute shout out to the nails, right? Because I have very sparkly, very adorned nails. And that's something as a treat to myself, but it is something, one of the things that people notice first about me when I walk into a space. And I remember in seventh grade having a math teacher named Miss Burgess who had very long nails. And I didn't it wasn't I just admired how neatly she wrote on the chalkboard with them, and, because, of course, people see your long nails, they're like, "How do you function?" And, of course, she was functioning just fine. And, she was always had her hair done, and her outfits were very cute, and, she taught math, and I thought that, math is not an easy subject to teach to middle schoolers, in general, but, she did what she needed to do. She had us teach lessons, at times, right, and trying to build up our presentation skills, confidence, things like that. Gave us real feedback. She was also, I think she was like also West Indian. So when she would get upset, like her accent would come out like even more. But it was more like not upset, like angry, but just like trying to put us like get it together. You know what I mean? And she would go into her Caribbean accent with us when she was trying to get us together. And I remember just thinking as I became a teacher, like who were the people that I was kind of pulling from? And there's another teacher that I always reference her, and it was Miss Sandoval. And I remember this is second grade, so she had left an impression on me because most people can't even remember the names of their elementary school teachers. But Miss Sandoval was a person who really saw me. And when I say saw me, I had just come out of temporary housing in the second grade, and I was in class, and I had previously had a lot of maladjustment issues in school. Like everybody was like, Kalia's really smart, but she just socially is not, she just doesn't take well to being in these social settings. I had been used to only being at home with my mom. So, and my brother, my older brother, when he would come home from school. So I wasn't used to being in school. And Miss Sandoval was the person who told me, one, that I needed glasses. She was like, "You need glasses, Kalia. You not, your math is correct, but that's not what I wrote on the board." You know what I mean? Like, and or she would say, if you have to go to the bathroom, just go to the bathroom. Don't raise your hand, because I used to wet myself in school. So she would say, and my mom told her that. She said, Kalia has like some bladder issues and she gets very nervous and she's afraid to ask for permission. And she says, "You never have to ask me for permission, Kalia. Like you can just get up and go to the bathroom." So when I became a teacher, I never had to pass. I was like, get up and go wherever you need to go, because that's what was given, that liberty was given to me, and that really helped me to just take care of my personal needs and still be present. So when I had to go to the restroom, I would go, I would come right back, come back and do the rest of my lessons, and I would treat my students the exact same way. And I think just authenticity has a lot, not just to do with how you show up, but what your values are and how you represent that. And it wasn't that Miss Sandoval connected with me on a cultural level. She was South American, right? Like we didn't necessarily have the cultural identity in common, but she just was a good human being. And she always brought Melba toast. I used to love the Melba toast she used to bring in. And every time I would put my chair up first, she would give me a piece of this like bread that was really well toasted and it was buttery. And she'd be like, Kalia, here's your toast for like being really good today. And I used to be so well behaved because I really wanted that. And she just like again, she just saw me, and I appreciated her understanding what I needed in a room full of 25 other children. Like I needed glasses. I needed to sit in the front of the room until I got my glasses. Like I could go to the bathroom whenever I felt like it. And she said, "Don't no one asked me why Kalia is getting up, right? Just go do your work." You know what I mean? And I think it's really speaks to this individualized attention that students need. Don't worry about what's happening with why I'm giving this person what I'm giving them, because when you need something, I will give you what you need as well. And I think that's part of being a very authentic teacher, is just also knowing who's in front of you and how do you respond in your humanity towards that person. So that was a roundabout answer, but I think I was going somewhere with that.
No, not at all. I love that answer, and there was this theme of authenticity that was very evident in both cases of these wonderful teachers that you had, and each one really uh, did their best to model that authenticity. I think the example of was it Miss Burgess
Hmm.
with just long nails and good handwriting and
Good
just
handwriting.
just just doing her thing, like right, doing math and all of
Yep.
that is great. But in particular with like Miss Sandoval, I felt that there was such deep concern and consideration that
Yep.
she extended to you, and this kind of generosity of just yeah, like even like the piece of toast, right?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
simple. But I
It's
mean, again,
very,
we're talking like second grade, right? The simple things like, that's where you meet and
yeah.
they value that. And like, yeah, simple suggestions, right? Things that, probably are taken for granted. Like, oh, you need glasses. Like,
Yep.
well, I mean, it seems obvious now. Right? And in hindsight, things are 2020.
Exactly.
Those glasses.
Exactly.
But yeah, and I felt really touched by the whole like bathroom pass, like you just go, and again, it's like there are things that I think as young students we have these insecurities, we have these concerns, we have these anxieties going into these classrooms, right? And
Sure.
to have that conversation beforehand and to just make it really clear that like this is how we're going to operate, and it's of course dictating on like what you're most comfortable with as like the student. And I just felt like yeah, that was just such a wonderful gesture that a teacher could have for the student, and that you continue to like apply in your own classrooms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
um, and so that kind of influence is really important. You've taken from both of these wonderful teachers in their own unique way, got the nails on point, deep consideration and concern in spades.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could take me to that moment where you passed the exam for like to become a teacher in New York, right? The
Yep.
fellowship, I think you mentioned it.
Yep.
Um, where did you start teaching, and what was your first day of class like?
Okay, so this is actually dope. So my principal, so let me go backwards to go forward. So at the time when you're in the New York City Teaching Fellows, they put you in a graduate school for um where you're going to do your coursework for the next 2 years. But in the beginning of that program, they have you student teach. So, in addition to taking classes in the summer, so you go to a summer school site, you do some work there, and then in the afternoon into the like early evening, you have coursework. One of my professors, he was an adjunct, Avi Tropper. He was doing his internship as an AP at the school that I ended up teaching in. So he knew that I was looking to all of us were looking for jobs essentially, but he knew I had a master's degree in English literature, and he knew there was a vacancy at the school he was at that was about to have an English vacancy, even though my license was in special ed. So I was being special ed certified, but because I already had the background in English, he said you might be able to do uh, kind of both. You might be able to work into both of your strengths. So I said, okay, well, let me know how that goes because I don't want to be running around here if I don't have to. If you have a connection, what I mean, I'd rather just go with your connection. So he gives my information over to the founding principal, who is still the principal there, Dr. Bernadette Drysdale. I love her to this day. She's like one of the people I model my leadership after. Jamaican woman, Black woman, she's very short, but lots of energy. She's another person, so much energy. She calls me on the fly and is like, do you have time to come in today? This is like some mid-August. Do you have time to come in today and have an interview? I am in my house watching Maury. My daughter's in the living room. I have to really do a latchkey kid moment where I'm like, don't answer the phone, don't answer the door, don't do anything. Mommy's coming right back. Luckily, the school was only about 20 minutes from my house. So I go to the school. My nails are very long, even longer than they are right now. If you could, Scott is looking at me. Y'all are not looking at me, but but they're long nails. And while I go into the interview, I'm kind of sitting on my hands a bit because I'm not sure if there's a bias there, if there's going to be an issue with me not being seen as professional. So I'm trying to, but I'm not going to not take the opportunity. So I'm like, I'm showing up anyway. We're just going to try to hide it as long as we can. And we're talking and everything is cool. And she and I are having a really great conversation. Don't even remember the question she asked me. And then when I go to shake her hand to say, well, thank you so much for the opportunity, she sees my nails and she says, I didn't see these. I didn't see, oh my gosh. And then she's like, type something. So she just starts making me do these little tasks with my nails. Like, can you type your name real quick? So I just type it on the typing board. She's like, can you pick up this pen? I was like, sure. What would you like me to write? She was like, I don't know, just write a note. And then she's like, oh my gosh, my students are gonna love you. They're gonna love you. Don't take another job. Let me get back to you. Just don't take another job. Mind you, I had no other job lined up. But I'm just like, okay, I won't consider any other offers like I had any on the table in the first place. And she was just like, probably, I think within 24 hours, she was like, oh, we need you to bring in your information, blah, 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 blah. Like, all went well. So I'm in the ninth grade. I come in the first day. I used to work at Hunter College as a school counselor, like I would do like go over your credits with you, show you like what courses you needed, all that. So I worked in an office. You go from an office to kids screaming, slamming lockers. It was just like the biggest migraine you could have ever imagined. But the kids took to me immediately. I was only like 9, 10 years older than them. Like all they see is these nails, they see in these shoes, they see in me like, just kind of coming through. And, I come through with like a syllabus, like I have them have a contract, but, I'm telling my little jokes and we're going through the motions, right? And the first day, I just remember the kids just being like, oh my gosh, did you see the new teacher, Miss Hopkins? Like her nails is so fly. Like they're just going through the motions with me. And I will say it was the best first year I think I could have asked for because my principal trusted me. Um, my students connected with me quite a bit. You my thing is like I didn't expect to be besties with all my students, right? That wasn't the intent, but I had a connection with all of my students. And I thought that was extremely important to let them know that I'm not just going to try to get over with being cool with you, but it matters that I am cool with you. You know what I mean? I don't want to negate that. And so it was just a really positive experience. I slept though, like I was a bear hibernating because the amount of noise that I encountered that day was just so intense that I needed to take a nap. So I think the first day, I like my daughter had her first day of school and she was, I think, in like fourth grade. I didn't even have time to ask her how her day was. I was knocked out, but it was a great experience.
Wow. Yeah. I normally hear stories of like just utter chaos and like it's very like negative and this and that.
Mm-mm.
But I mean, that sounds like a great day. And that story about the nails, I feel like I need to get like some long nails because
Something needs to
that's how you
happen, I'm
get
telling you.
jobs.
It's the showstopper. It is the showstopper for
The
real.
showstopper. Okay, well, if I do go down that path, I know who to reach out to.
You
And
will reach out to me, yes.
yeah, but I think it's just it's wonderful how you tell the story from this like initial point of like I don't really know who I'm talking to in this interview. Maybe they might not like my I mean because that's a serious thing like in the
Sure.
sense of like kind of prejudices and like kind of things that maybe just they won't tell you, but
No,
you'll know because you didn't get the job. You did everything
exactly.
else right. And and so then to have that reaction and to kind of have that excitement of her being like, you know what, I think this will be a connection with the students.
Sure.
And then to have that immediately, validated on day one, I just find it's again to the point of authenticity. Just
Mhm.
show up as yourself, right? I think that's
Yep,
the main takeaway. And
yep.
teachers, I think the most successful ones are able to have that connection because they're unabashed with how they, approach certain things, the way they conduct the class, or the way that they present. Um, and and while you held the teacher, you had the teacher hat on, or the teacher nails on, you
Yeah.
also didn't stop being Khalya. And I think that speaks to that deeper kind of like human element, right? Like I don't know,
Absolutely.
people think that teachers are just like, oh, they're just talking heads and they're boring.
And boring. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But we go to the grocery store. We
And the
go,
club, and we go to
yeah,
the
we go
club
to the
sometimes
club.
too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, I'll be honest, I don't really go to the club, but
I didn't
but
have
I
time to
do
go to
other
the
cool
club though,
things.
but when I did go, I was very cute. But I didn't have time like that.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that this connection of like teachers, but like really good teachers are really good human beings, and to be a good human being in a way means bringing out that kind of like core essence of like this is what I'm about, or this is who I am in this moment. This kind of becomingness, I think, is really engaging.
Absolutely.
They're always students are always asking questions like where did you get your nails done? Like
Mhm,
basic stuff.
mhm,
Like
mhm.
why are you going with this color, this design, or like check this out. And so yeah, like that speaks to a tight bond of like teacher student relationships. And so those relationships I would imagine have been what sustains you in the work that you do because nails aside, the
Yeah.
work that you do is incredibly serious and demanding. I mean, okay, your nails are very, demanding and serious
Yeah.
too, but
Yes, yes,
you
yes.
get what I'm saying.
But in
Yes,
real life, yes, yes, yes.
yeah, we're talking about futures, right, of these students.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so as you have, continued in your journey as an educator, you've taught many classes, and you now teach teachers, and you do it at the graduate level as well.
Yes.
Yeah, what are some I don't know. I'm just curious, like what are some takeaways, like some kind of learnings that you would say that stand out through the decade or more experience that you've been able to bring in your capacity right now?
I mean, some people ask me questions like, "What do you like better? Do you like better, like, teaching high schoolers, or do you like it teaching, like,
Mhm.
graduate students?" And it's not a I love teaching, period. Like, that's a hard period, right? I just love teaching. But I do think there's a way that for me, the universality around it is the idea of partnership, right? I think the other issue is people think authentic is just like, "Okay, I'm showing up as myself," but authenticity also comes from disclosing what you don't know. And I used to have to be very humble in front of my students and say like, "Oh, I don't even know that," right? But it's okay. We can figure that out together. You know what I mean? Or I've never heard that before, but let me look into that. Because I was also very young, right? And I was also becoming and I was also learning. I was 24 when I came into teaching. And so now being almost 40 is a very different business. Teaching graduate students is also like I'm talking to adults with lives, with children, with previous careers, with all kinds of experiences, travel, coming from different countries, all of that. Like that is something that I take in. Like I'm ingesting that. I'm also, and again, I go with that word synergy. Like we're going back and forth because I know you have experiences, whether you are 5 or 35 or 55, right? Like 5-year-olds have experiences, and I want to hear what those experiences sound like. And how can I connect and how can I relate? And I think that's the most rewarding part about being in this work is that you're constantly learning through just dialogue. Like I talked to, when you would all be in your breakout rooms, and I'd say lift that when you get to the main room because I need that to once you put your words out there, now everyone else has to kind of like see how they feel in relation to those sets of words that you chose to use, right? And so we're all constantly like reevaluating, reassessing, reflecting like, oh, I actually didn't think about that, or I actually don't I'm uncomfortable by that. And why am I uncomfortable by that? And I disagree with that. But like, what is causing me to disagree with that? And I think it's not just about disagreeing or agreeing. It's about like, what are we bringing to that is causing us to have the feelings, the emotions, the responses, the behaviors that we're having. And that's something you get to see being an educator, especially if you're not just concerned with right and wrong answers. And I was fortunate enough to be an English teacher where things were very interpretive. So I love the fact of seeing like how one thing could be seen in several ways. And I think that's part of, and I'm not going to try to go ahead of you, but I think that's part of like thinking about this notion of global citizenship. It's like there's so many perspectives, there's so many ways that people are coming into their experiences that you want to still know that we're different, but that there's a place where I can still feel connected to you and belong. And so that sense of belonging comes from me just being like, we're engaged in the same topic, but we're not having the exact same experience with this topic. And that's cool. So, once you realize your job is not to necessarily, I'm not here to bring you necessarily over to my side and vice versa, but we're here to just kind of see how all of these things make up a bigger structure, right? It's not your side or my side. It's like all of this is building something new. And I think that's really dope, as an educator, if you see it for its opportunities and its possibilities, this shit is fun. Excuse me, I cussed. I'm sorry. But it's fun. It's such a fun profession and a rewarding one.
Well, I mean, you've sold me. I'm to the idea of being a teacher. Thank you for really, advocating and saying why you teach, and why it doesn't really matter about the specific grade levels. It matters about how you appreciate and value the experiences that people bring with them into a shared learning environment. And it's funny you were saying like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to get ahead of you. Khalya, I'm just trying to keep up with you. So you're just doing you, and I'm doing my best to just show up and bring my authentic
You
self.
showing up. You showing up and showing out. Don't worry
Thank
about
you.
it.
Thank you. But I'm so glad that you mentioned about global citizenship. And I feel like you've said different words that are just kind of like it's like mapping out. It's like the constellation of like kind of where you're coming at it from. Because you mentioned not only about authenticity, but the importance of relationships. You mentioned perspectives just now. And then I loved what you said about learning through dialogue, right? And I think and then it speaks to like you just being equal parts, the teacher, the instructor, but also student, because then you're occupying that space of just like I'm here to like learn from you as well. There's that mutual kind of like that shared inquiry, that engagement that I think is really deep. So I wanted to ask um about this term global citizenship. When was the first time that it kind of popped up on your radar? And then is that something that kind of informs how you've just now kind of articulated with these different words and terms? Like how did you kind of come into this notion of global citizenship, or is it something that's just been more recently kind of you've been drawing from your experiences and realizing, oh, this is actually kind of what it means to me now?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely more recent. But I would say the term is more recent, not the concept. So I think we're like, words mean things, obviously. And so you want to make sure that when you're saying something, people are able to, have a sense of familiarity with the term. So you don't want to, like, I know when I'm having conversations in classrooms, um, both with teachers and with students, like I'm trying my best to make sure that we all have a sense of belonging. All have a sense of not just inclusion, but just that whatever's being said here is because we are our own community, right? Because you all come from different communities, but as of right now, we are our own community, and that comes up. That's comprised of a lot of different types of people. Um, but we still look out for each other. We are someone who protects, right? We are making sure that everyone feels seen, they feel heard. And sometimes people don't want to be seen and heard in a particular way, right? They don't want to be highly visible, and that's okay too, but you're still with us. And I think that that has to be honored as well. Everyone doesn't want to be extra. I'm an extra person, right? I'm seen when I come into a place, but I also respect when people are like, no, I'm good just being an observer. And you're still an observer, but you're still in it with us. Um, the global citizenship term, I think there's starting to be some buzz, I think in the, like New York City public schools because of current events, because students are actually finding out more information via social media than they are in their classrooms. And I think there's a push now to make sure that students are quote unquote global citizens. And I still feel a little wishy-washy about the ways in which that's defined in certain spaces. But, to your point and your synopsis of what I said just now, I do believe it really is about partnership, belonging. It is about, lifting perspectives. I think that's something that we talked about even in our class, right? And also in policy. That's not my strongest suit, but I do understand the implications that it has, right? That, what's written, we can then follow. Certain things I can follow, I'm going to follow because they are aligned to my values. So me, Khalya, doesn't necessarily need something to be written down for me to do what's right, but some people do need things written down in order to do what's right, and I understand that. So policy is extremely important. Um, but I do feel like one of the things that has come up lately, and I was saying this offline before we started the conversation, there's a book called Black Powerful by Natasha Marin. And it has a lot of contributors, just people writing about their experiences of when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When do they feel most protected? When do they feel most indigenous? Like, so there's a guiding question, and then there's a group of writers who just respond to that question. And usually the same way you asked me in the beginning, like, what's your name? Where are you from? Where are you based? It comes up in the writing as well. And a couple people wrote, like, my name is this and I'm a global citizen, right? And I thought that was really interesting that that was the way that they chose to, because most people were like, Charlottesville, Virginia, I live in Illinois. I was born here and now I live here. This person was like global citizen, and I loved it. And I don't have the specific writer off the top of my head, but one of the things that was said that I really resonated with me, and I don't even have the book in front of me, but it resonated with me so much, was I'm a global citizen because I know there's no place on this in this world where Black people haven't set foot, right? So I'm comfortable wherever I am. And I try to take, and I read that and I was like, oh wow, like I want to be that person. I'd like to think that even through my insecurities and the things that I'm self-conscious about and anxious about, that I still try to show up as someone who belongs in the space. And that's a very difficult thing to do sometimes as a Black woman who, I was a teen mom, right? Or as a warrior mom, as Mariah would say, right? And like, and I know that this wasn't a lot of the places that I've been, those places weren't set for me. And that's cool, but I still show up as if everybody I know has, ever loved has been here before. And I think that's super important for our students, right? To know that anywhere you go in the world is where you belong. And I think that's something that I tried to instill in my students, not always consciously, not with like this intent, but I think by the end of my teaching at the K to 12 space, I was very clear on that I wanted you to feel good about who you were. I've taught predominantly Dominican students. We had some overlap in our cultures and we had some differences in our cultures, but when it was all said and done, they knew, like, I don't care how you got here. I don't care if you're undocumented. I don't care what's you showed up, you did the work. You belong in any space that you set your foot in. I don't care what papers say. I don't care what anything says. Like, you're here and you're valued. And Yeah, that's my long drawn out way of talking about that.
No, that was the only way you could have talked
Yeah.
about it. And it was beautiful. And I'm so glad that you brought into the discussion this book reference. That actually, again, I can't keep up with you. It's you're just you're too quick, you're too good. Because like I always end like the conversations with, can you share like a book recommendation?
I can share some other things, but
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so we're good. But I was just like, wow, Khalya's is on it. Yeah, so like this book, it's called Black Powerful.
powerful. Hmm.
Yes. Okay.
He has a
Yeah,
clear called Black Imagination as well. Mhm.
okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I just love yeah, I love that pronouncement of like I'm a global citizen. The reason for that is rooted in belonging, right?
Yeah,
Deserving to be wherever your feet are planted. And
yeah,
that sense of like it's a big world, And at the same time, our ancestors came from
yes,
everywhere, who
yes,
are those ancestors? I think that's a big important aspect to the narrative that we see when it comes to marginalized or discriminated against populations, the kind of sense of like who am I? Who are we? And why are we under the kind of circumstances of like racial oppression and like the kind of just compounding effects that has had over the centuries of our country's existence. And yeah, and I fully believe that that interpretation of global citizenship is important, much more profound and needed, rather than just like kind of like global literacy. That is important, and I think that's kind of what you were alluding to in the
yeah,
case of like the buzz in like New York.
yes, yes, yes.
It is an important skill to filter out all of the kind of, the onslaught of like just news, like breaking news and this is
Yes,
happening, but I think if it's not tied to a sense of identity, there's no connection to one's own heart and how that this, it's almost like magic
yep,
ability that humans have to empathize. If it's not grounded in any of that, then I mean you could be the most knowledgeable person about global events there are, but like it doesn't really affect anything.
yes.
Um, and so yeah, so I just wanted to,
Can I
mention.
add?
Mhm, yeah, of
Can I add?
course.
You said something that I wanted to mention. So you said the thing around identity. In particular, I think one of the things that needs to be emphasize to students and to people in general, right? That you can't be this global citizen if you're not a local citizen, right? You're not looking at how you're impacting your immediate surroundings, but also that you're not, and this is not a real word, but like, in terms of even being a citizen of self, right? Like, how do I feel about myself in my own skin, in my own body? Do I value my own body? Because then how can I value others? How can I be an advocate for others? um we do this thing, and Beth, who also I taught with an A term, she introduced this notion of rights and responsibilities to our classroom space. And so we would co-construct along with the students, what are our rights in this space, what are our responsibilities in this space to one another. And the interesting thing that we would know is how much, and I actually just did this with a school last week, how much people see them having way more responsibilities to one another than rights for themselves. The rights list would be much shorter, and then the responsibilities will be a lot longer. And I would say, well, if you don't feel like you have rights as an individual, how are you then being responsible to everyone else, right? Because I have to first see myself as worthy of certain treatment before I can extend that treatment elsewhere. And I felt it was really interesting to see how when I do that exercise, a lot of the times the rights are way shorter than the responsibilities. And I think that that's something to think about in terms of what we hold. And somehow we think that's somehow being noble, right? Because I'm willing to do more for others than I'm willing to do for myself. And I'm like, no, 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 value yourself as a citizen, like my self citizenship, and then I can extend to local global citizenship. I can't do that if I'm not right. What Lauren Hill say, how you gonna win when you ain't right within? You can't, you can't win if you're not right within. And I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of unpack a little bit more. Like, we're so busy trying to go outward, and I'm like, no, you go inward, because the inward will then dictate the outward. So yeah, this is something that came up as you were talking.
I don't know, that's awesome. Great contribution. And I think that it speaks to this need for a balance in that list. I mean, it probably much more complex than just simply,
Of
all right,
course.
you got five over here for responsibility. Okay, five over here for rights. All right, we're good. No, but I do think that that kind of consideration, really valuing the inner work that has to happen. And my thoughts take me to kind of like concentric circles of like one kind of pushing and then the outer circle expanding,
Yep.
and oftentimes with this local global dynamic, yeah, the local is the one that's kind of leading the way and kind of expanding, and
Yep.
hopefully the goal is lifelong learning
Yep.
and commitment to empathizing with others and kind of training that as a skill, and understanding that there's always more to be learned, and that we don't have it's yeah, you were saying about like the disclosing what you don't know. That brings
Hmm.
us back to the authenticity piece of like it's okay not to know, even though society and professionalism and whatever arena you find yourself in would like to tell you otherwise, that, oh, how come you don't have the answer? Aren't you the expert? Don't you have the degree? And you're like, hey, I'm a human being. I'm just doing the
Right.
best I can. And and again, to be a global citizen, like it's I think it is really as simple as the whole being a good human being. And trying to get us full circle here with the teaching, the being a good human being, but like I do think that we see this modeled in not only like the great world leaders, like a Nelson Mandela or someone like who truly went through such transformation, but has this kind of like presence about them. That same presence can be felt in our like second grade teachers, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
you got to give them credit, so, especially if they be rocking the nails.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. If you rock
Nelson
the nails, you
Mandela,
get all the praise, all the praise.
yeah, yeah. He's done many great things in his life. He did not have the glitzy nails. Um,
Exactly.
so, we are coming to the end of our conversation. And, I wanted to ask about the book. I know. It's been so lovely. And I really appreciate you for showing up and just, really, gracing us with your story and your influences and yeah, and how it's like your orientation about teaching and how this concept of global citizenship is still forming, right? It's still being informed by the various books, especially the most recent one with Black Powerful.
Yeah.
But it's it comes with a lot of experience. And so, do you have any other book recommendations or even movie recommendations too? But
Yeah.
something that might be fitting for our conversation.
So I'm not going to so for anybody who knows me, I'm not recommending any shows right now because all I've been watching is cult documentaries. So y'all gonna have to we're gonna have to table that part. But I'm very much a fan of Adrienne Marie Brown's work. She has the Emergent Strategy series, and she really talks about possibility. That's like a lot of the root of her work. She's right now based, I think, in Detroit. And of course, if you know anything about has been going on in Detroit in terms of Flint and the water, all kinds of things. But she's such an Afrofuturist in terms of just thinking about what is possible for people who are poor, queer, Black, brown, etc., like all these marginalized identities that she doesn't really compartmentalize, which I think is great, right? It's not like, oh, got the Black person check, got the queer person. It's like it's so much going on, it's so much richness, and I think she's always thinking about what it means to preserve life, to preserve the earth, to think differently. And she's very much inspired by Octavia Butler. So she talks about like all this apocalyptic kind of things, but that really drive us to then get down to our best rooted selves, right? It's like when you take away all of this, all of these distractions, all of these things that really create destruction. Now you just have your humanity. And usually humans, not only do we want to survive, but we also want to grow things. We also want to live. We also want, you know what I mean? There's so much that we want to do. And I think that's super important in terms of her contributions. And then right now too, I've just really been obsessed with this notion of rest. And Trisha Hersey also talks about just rest, right? She's from the Nat ministry. And we as marginalized folks have so much that we carry with us, and we're so exhausted all the time because of not the double weight of just doing your job and operating as a person in a body that is not always valued, that it is important for us to be global citizens. And by being global citizens, you got to lay down and take a nap, and take care of yourself, and I go back to that because we do want to, there's so much that needs to be changed, and we understand that, but we can't do all of it. And the best thing you can do is take care of yourself first. And I think this getting clear, because when you're always in the act of doing, your mind is not at rest. You can't strategize appropriately. You can't think straight. You can't run on empty. So I think right now those are two of the women who are really having me rethink the way that I am showing up. And so I'm always thinking about, you know, I'm reflecting constantly, but I'm also just like, who has a perspective I haven't heard? And those are the two women in the last like couple years who I feel have been just like constantly coming out with content or things like that, or having conversations that we as people of color are not used to having often.
I love that. Yeah, rethinking how you show up. It just speaks to the ongoing, project of
Yeah.
self-betterment, but also self-discovery, self-realization. The fact that, you've been teaching for many, many years and you're, incredibly knowledgeable, you have so much experience, and yet when you get to the top of a mountain, there's always this bigger mountain in the distance.
Yes.
You're like, all right, time to climb that one now.
Yes.
So to see how, through the actions that you take, you're doing what is, in essence, your mission. But then also you're curious to learn from others who are seeing different pathways towards like where we should be going, or considerations of where we should be going that will inform each step that you take. And I think that's wonderful. And that's what a good teacher does. They just keep being students, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
Sounds contrary to it, but I think it's true. And so thank you so much, Khalya, for this wonderful and super, lively and energizing, stimulating conversation. I wanted to give the last few words to you. Any kind of send-offs, any other shout outs, whatever it is to kind of, conclude.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to share space with you as your instructor, but now also as your guest on your platform. And shout out to Dr. Rhonda Bondi, who was my co-professor and who's an amazing person, just an amazing, she's a wealth of knowledge as well. And I just want to, shout out all the teachers, all the educators in whatever capacity you do that, parents, future educators, because we gonna need y'all. As you can see, that shortage it's not getting better. The teacher shortage is not getting any better. So, we need more of your minds. And I hope too that you're able to change how we even do education. That's one of the things that I'm hoping. I want people to be their authentic selves. I want them to um, bring in all of the things that are happening from the outside inside, and having those conversations not from a place of judgment, but of a place of like, let's explore together, let's unpack these things together. Not that here's my position on it per se, but we're in the world, right? And the world doesn't stop in the walls of the classroom, right? It's an extension of that. It's a microcosm of what's happening outside. And so I just challenge everyone to not shy away from the hard conversations, and be a master at your craft, but also be willing to be a neophyte too. You got to be new sometimes. You got to learn new ways of doing the same thing. So with that, I mean, it's been great. Ashe.